Hello everyone, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Myself Parthopratim Bora from Department of Sociology, Dibrugarh University, Assam. The title of this module is Critical Theory, the Frankfurt School, Contribution of Max Horkheimer from the paper Contemporary Social Theory. So Max Horkheimer is one of the leading contributor in the school of critical theory. His theory is basically one of the unique or distinct contribution within the broader domain of Frankfurt School. So as you know, Frankfurt School when emerged, it was under the leadership of Karl Grunberg, and whose orthodox Marxism was initially the characteristics of Frankfurt School. And when Max Horkheimer took the directorship of Frankfurt School in 1930, it basically changed whole nature of understanding of Frankfurt School. The character or the nature of Frankfurt School changed with the starting of the work under the leadership of Max Horkheimer. Max Horkheimer, with his inaugural lecture itself, talk about the distinctive nature of the work that the Frankfurt School will do after his leadership. So, especially after the assuming of the leadership or the assuming of the directorship by the Max Horkheimer, the nature of the character changed from the orthodox Marxism under Karl Grunberg to that of more practical Marxism. Some of the important work of the Max Horkheimer basically associated with the understanding of the Enlightenment, the reason, the cultural industries, or on the other hand, he tried to give a new Marxian understanding to some of the important aspects of capitalist society. So this module will be basically discussing some of the important ideas that were developed by Max Horkheimer, and as well as it also tried to see the relevance of his work in the context of the broader school of Frankfurt School. While giving the inaugural lecture itself in the 1931, so the title of the lecture that was given by the Horkheimer was The Present Situation of Social Philosophy and the Task of an Institute of Social Research, and which was followed by a number of essays in the early 1930s, set out in the detail the idea of interdisciplinary social research, which was the goal of critical theory. Aimed at a balanced integration of philosophy and social sciences, it attempted to bridge the gap between the values or ultimate ends with the sphere of the reality or the concrete existence. So, the basic aim of the institute, as he given in the inaugural lecture itself, was to coordinate the philosophy and that of the social sciences, and how the value can be related to that of the reality that actually exists in the society. So that was the ultimate aim of the Institute of Social Research, as it was clarified by the Max Horkheimer in the inaugural lecture itself. While studying the society, or while studying developing his theory, Horkheimer was critical of positivism or sciences because they were too specialized, and because of the specialized nature of the sciences, he was critical of the sciences, and he said that the specialization or focusing narrowly on the technical detail of the respective discipline, sciences actually insulate themselves from the insight or the finding that the other researchers have. So it is a problem with the sciences, because they are too much associated with the specialization. They do not give any importance to the findings that are founded by from the other sciences. So that was one of the important problem problem of science that was seen by Horkheimer. So that kind of specialization was understood by Horkheimer as a chaotic specialization, because because of the specialization, the sciences fail to have a complete picture of the society. They fail to have a total picture of the society, and because they do not have the total picture of the society, it cannot work for the betterment of the society. And in his another important essay, Notes on Science and the Crisis, he observed that science fails to grasp its relationship with society, which shape its very existence and the future direction. So another problem that he sees with the science is that the science basically fail to see what relation that the science have with the society. So as a result, because science failed to see their relationship with the society, the failure lies in the fact that they cannot work for the betterment of the society. So if they could have realized what the relation the science have with the society, they could have worked for the betterment of the society, as it was understood by Horkheimer. So similarly, he also criticized the idea of positivism, because as Horkheimer argued, positivism too much emphasis on the fact is a kind of failure, because if the positivism gives too much emphasis on the fact, it basically is out of the context and that destroy the potential of the human emancipation. And as a result, he said that because as we can see, because the positivism which is dependent on the fact, as a result, because of the too much emphasis on the fact, it is out of the context, and as a result, it cannot work. On the other hand, positivism cannot work on the potential of having human emancipation. Now let us discuss the idea of critical theory and the traditional theory as developed by Horkheimer. And in 1937, Horkheimer published one of the important essay, Traditional and the Critical Theory, and where he basically talk about the ideological manifesto of the Frankfurt School. At the very outset, he basically tried to distinguish between what is called social theories or the scientific social theories and the critical theories. So these are the three kind of theories given by Horkheimer. One is social theories, another is scientific social theory, and third one is the critical theory. And Horkheimer said that the first two, that is the social theories and the scientific social theories, belongs to the broader category of the traditional theory. On the other hand, the second one, that is the second group, consists of the critical theory. So he basically distinguished that these three kind of theories, and he said that the traditional theory basically give emphasis on the consistency, and because the traditional theory talk about the consistency, what is the consistency that lies, as a result, it failed to see the distinction between the theory and the practice. So that was the important characteristics of the traditional theory. Again, Horkheimer criticized the idea of objective knowledge, because for him, object of knowledge is embedded within the social and historical process. And on the other hand, we need to see the science within the broader social framework. So because of that, because the object of knowledge need to be understood within the broader social or the historical process, as a result, he is against the idea of objective knowledge. And he argues that traditional theory failed to realize that it is the prevalent structure of the society, or on the other hand, it is the prevalent economic structure of the society, that is capitalism, that actually shape the scientific work and not the mental processes of the savant, as Horkheimer sarcastically addressed the scientists. Critical social theory, on the other hand, purposefully examines the manner in which a theory emerges out of a particular social and historical setting. It attempts to critique the inequalities inherent in that social setting through immanent critique and from the perspective of the oppressed. It is the role of the critical theories to help the oppressed masses to articulate their suffering and bring out the change. So the significance of the critical theory is that it basically helps the oppressed classes to understand the nature of oppression, and in that way to come out of that oppression. So it is the significance of the critical theory. So on the other hand, the traditional theory, which basically gave emphasis on the consistency, and on the other hand, because the traditional theory failed to see the relation between the theory and the practice, on the other hand, there is a close relation between the theory and practice in case of critical theory. And because of the close relation that is there between the theory and practice in the context of critical theory, we can see that critical theory actually can play the role of emancipator for the oppressed groups in our society. Now let us discuss Horkheimer's understanding or his critique of Enlightenment reason. In the Frankfurt School, Horkheimer had a collaborative work with Theodor Adorno, and the collaborative work that the Theodor Adorno had with Horkheimer was successful to contribute one of the important understanding of Enlightenment. So it was a kind of one of the important critique of the Enlightenment reason that the Dialectics of Enlightenment, which was published by the Max Horkheimer along with Adorno in 1947. The Dialectics of Enlightenment that was written by Horkheimer along with Adorno, it opened with a pragmatic discussion of the Enlightenment, the period in the history of Europe that characterized by the birth and the flowering of science, reason and modernism. The central thesis of the Horkheimer and Adorno is that the Enlightenment seeks to undermine myth, yet in so doing, it rigidifies into a new myth, namely the reduction of reason to the claim of positive science. Thus, it ends up perpetuating a new form of irrationality in the guise of rationality. So, it says that too much emphasis on the reason is basically a kind of failure of the Enlightenment. One of the important chapters in the Dialectic of Enlightenment is the cultural industry, where he basically talks about the Enlightenment as a kind of mass deception. And in the chapter entitled Elements of Anti-Semitism, authors attempt to theorize about the deadly ideology of anti-Semitism propagated by Nazis. The book concludes with the notes and drafts on a wide range of topics which are as thought-provoking and interesting today as they were half a century ago. Reason flourished in and through Enlightenment, but, argues the authors, its development was contradictory. On the one hand, it brought about enormous progress in critical thought, and on the other, a dehumanizing rationalization of human society wherein people were enslaved by the progress of technology. Human beings were thus alienated from both themselves and the world in which they live. So this was the problem of the reason that was seen by the Horkheimer and Adorno. So on the one hand, because of the too much emphasis on the reason, it basically dehumanized the human being. So what he said that the too much emphasis on the reason or the too much emphasis on the rationality is basically led to the enslavement of the human being into the progress of technology. So in that context, the human beings are alienated. What he said, the human beings are alienated on the one hand from the world as well as from themselves. So that was a kind of two kind of alienation. On the one hand, the human beings are alienated from the world in which they live, and secondly, they are alienated from themselves. And as the authors argues, this alienation is mainly because of the too much emphasis on the reason or on that of Enlightenment. At this juncture, it is also interesting to see the difference between the subjective and the objective reason as given by Horkheimer, which was basically given in his book The Eclipse of Reason, which was published in 1947. The subjective or instrumental reason is rooted in self-interest and self-preservation and primarily focused on the means to achieve the goal. Objective reason, on the other hand, is concerned with the ends rather than means. It attempts to root truth and a meaning within a comprehensive totality. So he basically sees the distinct difference between the subjective reason and the objective reason. While the subjective reason is associated with the primarily associated with the means to achieve the goal, on the other hand, the objective reason is associated with the end rather than the means. So subjective reason, while subjective reason is associated with the means, but objective reason is associated with the end. And this difference between the means and the end distinguishes the subjective reason and the objective reason. So in that context, he basically gave the example of capitalism, and he said that capitalism is so much associated with the self-interest that basically it became ultimately destructive or it basically became inimical to the goal that the capitalism want to achieve, and it is mainly because of the too much emphasis on the self-interest. Similarly, he also talked about that how in the drive to conquer the nature by any means, humans have forgotten about the ecological as well as environmental system and succeeded in causing them such a damage that result in all manner of the natural disaster and the calamities. And so they basically gave the example how the human being in their attempt to conquer the nature are basically creating ecological as well as environmental disaster, and it is associated with the various kind of calamities that are taking place in the societies. In the second excursus of dialectics of enlightenment, the authors move from domination of external nature to the domination of inner nature, that is human instinct and drive. Freud's theory of libido and the concept of inner drive had a major impact on Horkheimer, who used these ideas extensively in some of his earlier essays. So it is basically the Horkheimer tried to see how the domination of external nature are changed to the domination of inner nature, and this shift from the attempt to dominate the external nature to that of attempt to dominate the inner nature, that was basically influenced by the work of Freud understanding of libido. Some of the other important work that were done by the Horkheimer, as I already mentioned, is the idea of cultural industry, which is relevant and thought-provoking today, as it was thought-provoking and relevant during the time when the dialectic of enlightenment was published. So Horkheimer argues that the traditional form of art like painting, theatre, opera, classical music, etc. were first supplanted by the mass media, which were part and parcel of the age of mass production under capitalism. Photography, radio, television, film, popular music, other forms of mass culture were experienced first by the early Frankfurt school intellectuals who migrated to America in the 1930s, including Horkheimer himself. During this period, Frankfurt School developed a critical interdisciplinary approach to study culture, in which they considered the political economy, textual and literary analysis, and social and ideological dimension, what they termed as cultural industry. So basically the cultural industry, or the idea of cultural industry developed by Horkheimer and Adorno, is associated with how the traditional culture is replaced or supplemented by the mass culture, or the idea of mass media in the contemporary time. And he said that this supplementation of the traditional culture with the mass media is basically changing the very understanding of the culture itself. And this was the development of the interdisciplinary approach to the understanding of culture that helped us to see the role of the culture in the contemporary capitalist society. And in that context, they basically talk about the social as well as ideological dimension of the culture in the contemporary society. That was the social or the ideological dimension of the culture in the contemporary capitalist society is the important contribution of the culture industry, the idea that was developed by Adorno and Horkheimer. The term culture industry connotes the commodification, massification and standardization of culture, which was like any other commodity, mass produced by the engine of industrial capitalism. However, it had the additional responsibility of providing ideological legitimacy to the capitalist system and socializing individuals to conform and fit into the society. Horkheimer and Adorno argued that the system of cultural production dominated by the mass media or the media of mass communication was controlled by commercial interests and advertising, which functioned to strengthen the root of the consumerism and capitalism. The chapter on anti-Semitism also is an example of viewing an issue from multiple theoretical perspectives. They approach it from various perspectives, including the political, historical, economic, religious, psychoanalytical, and anthropological ones. From the critical theory perspective, they attempt to explain anti-Semitism in terms of the decline of reason and the trend towards the conformity and stereotyping thinking, which form the basis of authoritarian personality. Dialectics of enlightenment raises one of the important fundamental questions. Is it possible for society to liberate itself from the ultimately destructive march of instrumental reason? Are all avenues for finding in reason the possibility of any liberative critique of society closed? There is much pessimism in both dialectics of enlightenment and the eclipse of reason. But at the same time, there are also hints that a critical theory can stimulate positive social change. Horkheimer does not present any concrete program of action because he believes that first and foremost, thought must be corrected and that reason must be freed from the clutches of instrumentality. Horkheimer also suggests in the eclipse of reason that human beings can escape from homogenizing and totalizing forces of society through individual action, non-conformism, welding together of a solidarity based on the experience of shared suffering and empathy. Thus we see the Horkheimer understanding of the contemporary capitalist society was based on his idea of reason and the Enlightenment as well as his idea of culture industry. While after assuming the directorship of the Frankfurt School got a new shape in terms of the trajectory of the thinking of Frankfurt School. It was basically how he tried to combine the theory with the practice, and in that context he was critical of the idea of reason or idea of reason that was propounded by the idea of enlightenment. Further, he also tried to see the role of the culture in the contemporary society, how the traditional form of culture is supplemented by the mass media. On the other hand, in fact, the mass media has overtaken the traditional form of culture and various traditional form of culture, and how it is basically creating the myth in our society. So how the culture industry is creating the myth or how it is creating the oppression in the society. So that was a broader framework that Horkheimer along with his collaborator Adorno tried to understand contemporary capitalist society. The way how it understood the reason or how it understood the suffering or the compression of the human society, it actually helped us to know the distinctive nature of suffering or the distinctive nature of the oppression that is propagated by the culture in our society. So this module is basically helping you to understand the work of Horkheimer, who belongs to the broader critical theory school of Frankfurt School. So this criticism basically of the reason or that of culture industry will also help us to know the nature of the working of the capitalist society in the contemporary time. What are the problems that are associated with the capitalist society and how it is shaping our lives. So for further readings and for detailed study, you can read the original works of Horkheimer. You can also read the supplement or the critiques of the work of Horkheimer that are given in the text. Thank you.